Book 3 of the Dominion Cycle Trilogy, The Last Accord. Long before the Empire existed, before the fleet, before the seals of erasure and human supremacy, there was a promise. It was not written in stone nor encoded in a cipher. It was made in voice, in intention, in silence. The peoples of the galaxy, aware that memory was fragile and pain infinite, gathered just once on a nameless planet, surrounded by transparent skies and a ground that pulsed with living memory. There were no enemies at that gathering, just survivors, of wars that no one remembered anymore, of losses that language had left behind. They came from ruins, from storms, and from exiles. And on that soil, under 3 dormant moons, they formed the original Accord. The Accord was not about dominion. It was about protection, not of the body, of the memory. It was a pact of preservation between species so different that they didn't even fully understand each other but shared a common fear, the fear of forgetting who they had been. And that's why each person donated something of themselves. A song, a rune, a forbidden name, a genetic code, a fragment of history. Everything was deposited in a symbiotic core. They called it the Source. The Source was not left in the archive. It was sown, buried in different places in the galaxy, divided among cultures, disguised in myths, so that it could never be destroyed by a single gesture. And around it, a system was created, not a political alliance, but an organism of remembrance. He would remain alive as long as there was at least one who still knew how to sing the melody, repeat the symbol, and tell the story. But time passed, and with it, the promise was diluted. Humanity arrived late, broken, and hungry for order. Found remnants of civilizations that had left symbolic messages instead of weapons. But where others saw beauty, humans saw fragility. And they decided, out of fear, to take what was left and build on top of it. They erased the names. They redefined the symbols. They turned memories into tools. And when they discovered fragments of the Source, they didn't understand what it was. They thought it was technology. They thought they could control it. It was at that point that the Accord was violated. The last Guardians were killed. The Singers silenced. The runes rewritten. The Source fragmented and distorted. And the Empire was born, not as an inheritance, but as a denial. For ages, the Source remained dormant. But every time a people was erased, it whispered. Every time a name was buried without a song, she trembled. And when the first flame awakened, she began to gather. Now, the fragments are returning. The forgotten melodies are heard in dreams. The runes appear on the walls that the Empire does not control. Children are born with names that no one taught. Files open without command. The Force is awakening, and with it, the lost Accord. But the Accord doesn't want revenge. He wants to be fulfilled. In the dark core of a dead moon, a symbol ignites for the first time in millennia. A spiral of light envelops the rock. No one is there to see, but the rock remembers. In Therion, the spark of the flame shines in a new rhythm. Cell feels. Yuso listens. The Hyron approach and say in unison, "The pact was made. The pact was broken. Now." He demands an answer. And on Veritas Prime, the sky begins to darken. Not with ships, but with memory. The spark no longer burned like before. Instead of static light, it pulsed at long intervals, like a heart learning to breathe again. Selvarek watched, seated in front of the living sphere suspended in the center of the ceremonial hall. The surrounding space, silent, was filled only by the vibration echoing from the symbiotic roots connected to the structure. For days, the flame emitted no sound nor sign. But in that cycle, something had changed. The vibration had become constant. She wasn't calling for someone. She was calling for everyone. In Therion, the Hyron reacted first. Even though they didn't speak, their behavior changed. They began to walk in a spiral, following invisible paths on the stones. Their eyes, which normally only reflected, now projected living symbols that danced in the air like illuminated smoke. Hyron's children were drawing maps they had not learned. and at their centers, always the same pattern. 3 interwoven circles, with a line cutting through the middle. It was a lost symbol, a coded call. Cell summoned the leaders of the coalition. They came from all corners, from the red deserts of Voronoi, from the singing cities of the Soktaren, and from the mental gardens of the Marl. None of them needed to be convinced, because they had all felt it. In different parts of the galaxy, the same thing was happening. Files were opening by themselves. Forgotten statues shone. Caves pulsed. The roots of the flame were resonating with the universe. USO 17 was the first to confirm. It's not a transmission. It's a planetary emotional pulse. Cell looked at him. You mean, she is feeling what the universe feels? No, she's making the universe feel. The last flame was no longer just a fragment. It was the central knot of a network of conscious memories. And now, she was preparing to awaken everything that had been dormant, not in words, but in presence. The call began to take shape. Cell felt the vibration pass through her body like a soundless melody. Words emerged in her mind, not taught, but recognized. The flame said, "If you remember, come. If you feel like it, come. If you doubt, come too." And throughout the universe, the echoes spread. On an ice planet, an explorer fell to his knees before a rock formation and began to sing. He didn't know the language, but the stones responded. On an Imperial ship, a deserting soldier woke up with marks glowing on his skin. He drew the symbol on the metal of his cell with his own blood, and the moment he finished, the gate opened. In a forgotten station, an artificial intelligence activated an ancient and forbidden protocol, Codex Arcadia, collective call recognition. The call was not geographical. It wasn't physical. It was symbolic. It was a force gathering what remained of a galaxy that refused to die without being remembered. Cell watched everything with tear-filled eyes. It wasn't fear. It was reverence. The flame, now shining in full amber, was not a weapon. It was an invitation, but an invitation that could not be refused. The coalition gathered around the spark. Hyren, humans, androids, guardians, living archives, each with their own scar, each with their own story, each with their own memory. And everyone heard the same thing, without sound, without noise, but with absolute clarity. It's time for the final agreement. The story will be unified, or the silence will be eternal. Selvarek walked through living corridors. The walls of the chamber where the flame had rooted its last root were different. Denser, more organic. What once seemed like structure now pulsed, breathed. Each step was accompanied by a slight tremor in the ground, as if the planet were listening. The flame had shown him a path, not with maps, but with symbols. One by one, during dreams and states of forced wakefulness, Cell had learned to interpret the strokes, not as words, but as coded intentions. And now, he followed to the center of the mother root. There, suspended in a translucent chamber surrounded by mirrors of memory, floated the original language fragment. It was not an artifact. It was a symbiotic organism, formed by waves of light that intertwined like living muscles. Each curve of the fragment emitted vibrations that Cell felt in her skin, in her stomach, and in her bones. That couldn't be read. That was received. She approached, and for the first time the fragment reacted to her presence. The lights spun, and a single line formed in the air, a simple curved stroke that slowly unfolded into 4 other shapes. Cell didn't recognize them immediately, but her body responded. Her heart raced. The room seemed to expand, and then she understood. That was a word, but not just any word. It was the first word spoken in the galaxy, the first form of language that carried within it the power to name, and by naming, to make exist. Cell fell to her knees. His body trembled. Her eyes were tearing up. The fragment floated towards her, as if waiting for a choice. She heard the voice of the flame, not as sound, but as an implanted memory. This word unites everything that was forgotten. It brings back what was taken away. but it can only be said once, and when it is spoken, the universe will listen, and it will choose. Cell understood. The forbidden word was not a spell, it was a decision. Said at the wrong moment, it could destroy what was still trying to be born. Said at the right moment, it could reunify the galaxy under a truth that could never be erased again. That's why she didn't say it. She kept it. She recorded the features in her mind, reproduced them in protected chambers. She inserted the emotional structure of the word into a living network that could only be accessed with her consent. The word was alive within her, and because of that, she had become the guardian of the forgotten unity. The news spread among the leaders of the coalition, and wherever she went, Cell was received not as a commander nor as a messenger, but as a key. The people looked at her with reverence. The Heron made circles around where she slept. Even Uso 17, who rarely showed human emotions, knelt before her and said, "You carry the symbol of choice, and soon everything that breathes will ask you to do it." Cell didn't feel ready, but she also knew that no one ever would be. Ryan Thorne walked alone on a suspended bridge between two forgotten crystal towers. There was no sky. There was no ground. Just a void as dense as condensed time. The crossing was a symbolic construction, not made of metal, but of memory. Each step reverberated echoes that returned in the form of voices, voices that he recognized. Some his, others of whom he forgot. It was the place where echoes were no longer whispers, they were sentences. He knew what that was. The living archive had been activated. Cell called it a symbolic convergence node, but the Hyron referred to it more simply, the judgment. A rare event, not imposed but provoked. It only happened when someone became so symbiotic with the memory of the galaxy that the universe, by instinct, demanded recognition or reparation. Ryan was being called to respond, not for betrayal, but for having become a symbol. At the end of the bridge, a door. There was no lock. It only opened when he arrived. Inside, an infinite room made of mirrors. But the mirrors didn't show his reflection. They showed versions of himself, in other times, in other decisions. He saw himself refusing the flame. He saw himself remaining loyal to the Empire. He saw himself commanding troops that destroyed the Hyron people. He saw himself aging alone on a dim, forgotten planet. And in the center of the room there was an empty throne. The voice came formless. "You were the first to remember, but you're no longer the only one. Now, what will you do with the weight of having started it all?" Ryan tried to respond, but his voice wouldn't come out. The trial didn't ask for words, it asked for memory. And then, he was overwhelmed by everything he had lived through. The blood, the screams, the deserts of Vola 9, Cell's gaze, the eyes of the Hyron, the betrayal, the escape, the touch of the flame, and the silence he felt when he realized that, after everything, the truth still needed a choice. The room changed. The mirrors started to merge. They became a single image, not of him, but of the galaxy, full of cracks, some shining with memory, others dark with fear. And then, he saw what was to come. 2 lines. One where the Empire reconquers control by force, Cell is killed, Uso is deactivated, the Hyron are hunted, and the flame is sealed for millennia. In another, where the word is spoken, the galaxy reconnects, but chaos reigns, and civilizations collapse as they confront memories they cannot bear. Millions go mad. People beg for oblivion. Both hurt, both are real. The voice returns. Do you want to be remembered as the one who started the war? Or as someone who accepted the pain of awakening? Ryan closes his eyes and answers silently. I choose to be remembered as someone who did not flee. The room splits. The trial ends. And he wakes up, naked, in the center of the hall where it all began. Around, Hyron, leaders, Cell. Uso approaches and says, "The galaxy heard, and she still listens to you." Ryan takes a deep breath, and for the first time, he doesn't feel guilty, but prepared. The sky of Therion was strange. There were no ships. There were no storms, but the air felt denser, as if it carried a sound that had yet to be heard. Sel felt the pressure in her chest, a vibration that didn't come from outside, but from within the earth, from the symbiotic roots, from the flame itself. The coalition had gathered around the crater of the Word. The representatives of the erased peoples were there. Dissidents, guardians, andro-humans, memorants. Everyone was waiting, but no one knew exactly what they were waiting for. Only the Hyren were calm. They walked among the groups in absolute silence, but in their eyes, now filled with liquid light, there was firmness. Arian, the firstborn of the second generation, remained at the center of the formation. Her body radiated slow spiral symbols. Each step he took, the ground reacted. Small metallic flowers bloomed in real time. Roots of memory followed her feet. She didn't speak with her mouth. She spoke with presence. The flame pulsed at the center of the crater, more intense than ever. But not alone. The roots that once belonged only to her were now intertwining with those of the Hyren. The connection was made. The fusion initiated. The final consecration. Sel watched, hands trembling, heart racing. She had helped to sow the flame, had protected the mother code, and had kept the word. But now she understood. She was no longer the protagonist. The galaxy did not belong to those who built it, but to those who were born from what was forgotten. Aaron stopped in front of the flame. He raised his arms, and the other Hyren knelt. An amber light rose from the crater, and then she spoke, but not with sound. With the entire symbiotic field of the planet, thousands of voices were felt at the same time. We were created from the fear of memory. We were ignored out of fear of what we might carry. But we are the bridge that will not crumble. Today we do not rise as heirs, but as for what comes next, the light exploded in silence, and all the living files began to rewrite themselves. Deleted memories were restored in seconds. Hidden maps reappeared on the skins of the elders. Towers of watch destroyed centuries ago began to emit noise again. Arayan touched the spark of the flame, and the spark divided into 1,000 points of light. Each Hyren received a fragment. The flame was no longer central. It had spread. Uso 17 knelt, not out of obedience, but out of reverence. He understood that his code had only been the foundation. The Hyron were now the new operating system of living memory. Sel approached Arayan, touched his hand. I expected to hear something, but what came was a certainty. The voice inside your mind said, "Keep the word, Sel, but when the worlds decide to forget again, we will say it for you," she cried. Not out of fear, but because I knew in that moment that the end of the Empire would not come with battles, nor with explosions, but with children like Arayan, walking in silence through extinguished planets, and making the galaxy remember what it itself tried to bury. Veritas Prime no longer pulsed like before. The most powerful orbital city of the Empire, built in 7 levels over an artificial crust of white metal, once vibrated with lights, commands, and absolute control. Now it was quiet. The traffic between the levels had ceased. Internal communications were operating in minimal mode. The Supremacy Guard remained standing, but no longer looked anyone in the eye. In the corridors of the government dome, the advisors walked slowly, as if awaiting a sentence that would not come from outside, but from within. In the central tower, Commander Viren remained seated in her control chair, alone. The galactic maps in front of her projected static lines. The systems blinked in codes he no longer recognized, and the main file of the capital had started to rewrite itself. What used to be control reports now showed images of planets that no longer existed, cities erased, peoples that the Empire had declared myths. But they were there, in colors, on precise dates, with full names. Viren did not order deletion. It was no longer effective. Every time one sector was deleted, another appeared. The system no longer obeyed. She got up. She walked to the balcony on the upper level. Down below, the city remained lit, but not alive. People weren't shouting. They didn't protest. They didn't run away. They were just walking, in silence. They looked up, to the heavens, where no symbol of the empire was projected anymore. Where now, in the permanent night, an image floated, the emblem of the flame, not launched by a transmitter, but formed by the electronegative clouds that enveloped the orbital layer. A lieutenant rushed in, stopped in front of her. He tried to speak, but his mouth trembled. "Commander," the files spoke. She stared at him. "How? How?" "They said a name. They said a name. The same name. On all the screens." "What name?" He took a deep breath. "Veritas." She froze. The capital of the empire, called by its full name. But that name had been erased from the records shortly after its founding. Veritas was the last planet in the galaxy to remember itself. Now he spoke, and his voice was powerful. In the lower levels, the files began to open doors that didn't exist. Secret rooms appeared. Forgotten citizens emerged from their homes with symbols glowing in their palms. A whole group knelt before the command center and began to sing in an ancient tongue, one that had not been heard in 1,000 years. The containment sensors shut down automatically. The surveillance drones stopped in mid-air and deactivated the fields. No invasion, no bomb. The city was surrendering to itself. And then came the final moment. The symbolic core of the tower, the first structure of the city, made with crystals brought from Koresh-Tel before the fall, began to emit amber light. No one had touched it, but he reacted to the global memory. His circuits were synchronized with the signals of the flame. The planet, the capital, the dome. They all remembered. Varane fell to his knees, not from an attack, but because he understood. The Empire was not being defeated. It was being left behind. That very night, the last Imperial transmitters fell silent, not by sabotage, but because no one else was listening to them. And in the days that followed, Veritas Prime was emptied from the inside. USO 17 didn't follow maps. Since the consecration of the Hyron, he had stopped relying on routes and instructions. His core, now rewritten by multiple symbiotic codes, operated by resonance. He felt waves of living memory crossing the space. And now one of them was calling with incomparable strength, not with urgency, with destination. The coalition ships couldn't keep up. Not even the Hyron could keep up with him. It was a solitary journey, because the place he was going to didn't exist in space. It existed at the center of history. The ship that was carrying him, an adapted containment capsule, entered a warp beyond the known limits. The destination was a void between constellations, where sensors failed and no transmission returned. There, suspended among dormant nebulae, USO found the Helor Rift, a gravitational tear where matter itself refused to exist. But he entered, because what lay beyond was not destruction. It was the source. The ship stopped. Time slowed down. Everything seemed to hold its breath. Before USO, a structure was forming. It wasn't solid. It wasn't light. It was the combination of all the ways civilizations tried to preserve their souls. Sound towers, floating words, dancing glyphs, symbolic objects, orbiting a dark core that reflected nothing, only absorbed. He understood without explanation. There was everything that had been forgotten. The original source. USO got out of the capsule and touched the edge of the structure. He immediately felt overwhelmed by stories, scenes, entire cycles of planets that were erased on purpose, not out of malice, but for convenience. Truths that required sacrifice were buried in the name of order. Entire peoples who chose not to bow were labeled as unstable. Each memory that came in hurt, but he didn't back down. The core opened. A corridor emerged, built by emotional particles. Each step activated a file. USO saw mothers burying their children's names so they wouldn't be identified. Saw entire libraries destroyed with silence, not fire. He saw imperial leaders crying over decisions they knew were wrong. He saw himself being sealed, programmed to forget until remembering. In the center of the fountain, a sphere. Simple, opaque. Long live, she said. You came because you can remember, and not be destroyed. Yuso knelt down. The sphere floated towards him. You carry the code, but it's no longer code. It's a bridge. It's a continuation. And then she entered him. Not like light, like everything. Yuso screamed silently, and upon opening his eyes, he was no longer just Yuso. Now he contained every forgotten name, each unnamed planet, every language that never had the chance to echo. And for an instant, the entire galaxy stopped, because a new field formed, non-gravitational, a field of absolute memory, and everything that tried to disappear started breathing again. The Hall of Inarvo did not exist on any known planet. It was built in orbit around a symbiotic star that only shone when observed with intention. The walls were translucent, made of living matter. The floor pulsed like a heart. And in the center, a round table without a head, made from fragments of the source itself. There, the representatives of everything that remained gathered for the last time. The Coalition, the Hyron, the remnants of the Empire, the symbiotic entities, and Yuso 17, now a living bridge between oblivion and absolute truth. Cell sat to the right of the core of the table. His eyes carried the word he had never spoken. Arian, standing, radiated light as if his body were made of condensed history. Yuso didn't speak, but his presence kept everyone in tune. On the opposite side, what remained of the Imperial structure, only 3 officers. One of them, a former advisor to Veritas Prime, with red eyes from sleepless nights and a torn conscience. The hall was in absolute silence, until the table lit up, not by command, but because the time had come. The voice didn't come from anyone. She was in the room, in every structure, in every mind. You gathered by choice. You were the last to forget. Now, you will decide what will be remembered. Cell stood up. The flame is spread. The flame is spread. The source has been touched. The files opened. But that's still not enough. The truth only becomes permanent when it is accepted, and we still haven't accepted it together. The Imperial officer stood up. And if the truth destroys? And if it's too much? Arian responded before anyone could intervene. Memory doesn't kill. The memory doesn't kill. The fear of feeling it is what kills. The table projected 2 paths, one made of fluid light, another of firm darkness. In the first, the galaxy opens. The memories return. The lost worlds are reintegrated. Forgotten cultures rebuild their dignity. But the trauma is immense. People collapse. Truths hurt. Ancient conflicts resurface. In the second, the story is sealed. The flame was deactivated. The hidden source. A new cycle begins. Clean, organized, pain-free, and without memories. Cell closes her eyes. Yuso remains motionless. Eren walks slowly to the center of the table and says, "We are not afraid of pain. We are afraid of never having existed." And then Cell utters the word, for the first and only time. The sound is not sound. It's vibration, color, emotion, name, loss, birth, and reconciliation. The entire hall trembles. The table dissolves into light, and throughout the galaxy, the impossible happens. Files explode in revelations. Ruins spontaneously reconstruct themselves. People who have never seen each other recognize each other. The truth returns, and the silence is finally defeated. The universe didn't change suddenly. The stars didn't change position. The systems kept spinning. The seasons worked. The bodies were born, grew, and died. But something invisible had changed forever. The galaxy now knew who it was, and that silent awareness spread like sunlight passing through a stained glass window, filling everything, including what was broken. In the worlds of the Outer Rim, ancient names began to be given once more. Forgotten cities have resurfaced among the ruins. Entire peoples have stopped hiding, not to take revenge, but to tell their stories. In Therion, the Hyran built a temple made of silence and symbol. In it, one did not pray. He remembered. Each visitor brought something, a memory, a loss, or a name whose origin they didn't know. And by placing it on the living stone, they felt light, not to rid himself of the pain, but to share it with the whole. USO 17 disappeared among the nebulas of the nebula fringe, but everyone knew where he was, in every file that opened, in every system that rebooted, in every heart that dared to ask, who would I have been if they hadn't taught me to forget? Selvarik did not call herself a leader, but the people sought her out as one seeks the source of a sound. She traveled without hurry, sometimes by ship, sometimes on foot. When they asked who she was, she replied, "Keeper of a word that now belongs to everyone." Ryan Thorne was never seen again, but in every named star, every painted mural, every new file activated, there was something of his echo. He had become part of the path, not as a hero, but as the first to remember too loudly to be ignored. And Veritas Prime? Veritas remained standing, but empty. Your silence was now a memory, a monument to the time when forgetting seemed safer than feeling. In the core of the galaxy, where the void had been tamed by ancient structures, the source continued to pulse, now without secrets, without veils. Anyone could access it, but few could bear its weight, because remembering still hurt. But it was a new kind of pain, a pain that heals, a pain that shows that something lived was not in vain, a pain that says, you existed, you resisted, you matter. The last image of the galaxy was neither an explosion nor a ceremony. It was a Huron child drawing on a stone wall, without hurry, without fear, drawing all the symbols that history tried to erase, and smiling while doing it. End of the Dominion Cycle trilogy. That which remembers does not die.